There are certain connections that don't begin with a moment. They begin with a feeling you can't explain, not excitement, not curiosity, not even attraction. Something quieter. Something that feels like recognition before understanding. Because the strangest part about being truly seen is that it doesn't always feel comforting at first. Sometimes it feels like being uncovered, like someone has walked into a room inside you that you never opened for anyone else. And the confusing part is, they didn't force their way in. They didn't demand access. They didn't break down the walls you built over years. They simply stood there long enough for you to realize the walls weren't protecting you from them. They were protecting you from being known. Most people interact with the version of you that is easiest to understand, the version that responds quickly, the version that explains itself, the version that doesn't require patience. But there is another version beneath that, the quieter one, the one that watches more than it speaks, the one that notices everything but reveals very little. The one that has learned that being misunderstood is sometimes easier than being fully exposed. Because when people misunderstand you, you can correct them. But when someone understands you, you have nowhere left to hide. And that is what makes certain people feel different. Not because they know every detail about you, but because somehow they recognize the things you thought were invisible, the pauses, the changes in your tone, the meaning behind your silence, the thoughts you almost say, but decide not to. They don't just listen to your words, they notice what exists between them. And that creates a different kind of connection, a connection built less on information and more on perception. Because anyone can learn facts about you, anyone can memorize your preferences, anyone can know your history. But very few people understand your patterns, the way your mind moves, the way you process, the way you protect certain parts of yourself. And when someone understands that without needing everything explained, creates a strange kind of familiarity, almost like meeting someone who speaks a language you didn't know you were carrying. That's when the internal question appears. Why does this feel familiar? Not because you've known them forever, but because something about the way they exist matches something inside you. And that kind of alignment is rare because most connections are built through effort, through time, through learning each other slowly. But sometimes there is a different experience, a moment where someone doesn't feel like a stranger you are discovering, they feel like someone you are remembering. And that can be both beautiful and unsettling because the mind likes explanations. It wants reasons, it wants categories, it wants to understand why one person feels different from everyone else. But some experiences don't arrive with answers. They arrive with awareness. You simply notice, I don't have to perform here. I don't have to edit myself here. I don't have to become smaller to be understood. And that feeling can change something. Because when you spend years controlling how much of yourself the world gets to see, being around someone who doesn't ask you to control it becomes powerful. Not because they save you, not because they complete you, but because their presence removes the need to constantly protect yourself. And sometimes the deepest connections are not created by someone who changes who you are. They are created by someone who makes you realize you were allowed to be that person all along. The strange thing about being understood is that you usually notice it after it has already happened. There is no announcement, no dramatic moment where everything changes. It happens quietly, a small reaction, a certain look, a sentence that lands too accurately. And suddenly you realize, this person is not just hearing me. They are noticing me. That difference matters. Because being heard is common. People hear words. They respond to sentences. They react to what is presented. But being noticed is different. Being noticed means someone is paying attention to what exists underneath the obvious, the things you don't explain, the emotions you don't name, the thoughts you hide behind normal conversations. And when someone starts noticing those things, something inside you becomes aware of their presence, not because they are trying to get closer, but because they are already close in a way you didn't expect. That can feel uncomfortable, especially for someone who has spent years being careful about what they reveal, careful about what they share, careful about who gets access to the deeper parts of them, because control feels safe, distance feels predictable. You know how to manage someone when they only know the surface, but when someone begins understanding the deeper layers, old strategies stop working. You can't rely on being mysterious. You can't rely on being unreadable. You can't rely on people only seeing what you choose to show, because somehow they begin recognizing the parts you never introduced. And that creates a strange conflict. A part of you wants to step back, not because the connection feels wrong, but because it feels too real, too effortless, too different from what you are used to. The mind starts asking questions. How did they notice that? Why do I feel comfortable here? Why does silence feel natural instead of awkward? Because silence just reveals something. Most people fear silence because silence removes the distractions. No performance, no explanations, no carefully chosen words. Just two people existing in the same space. And if someone can sit there with you without trying to fix the silence, without trying to fill it, without trying to control it, that creates a different kind of trust, a quiet one, the kind that isn't built through promises, the kind that forms through consistency, through small moments where someone shows you, I see what you are showing me, and I also respect what you are not showing yet. That is rare, because many people are attracted to the idea of understanding someone, but fewer people have the patience to actually understand. They want answers, they want access, they want the full story immediately. But real understanding doesn't work like that. It doesn't force doors open. It waits until someone feels safe enough to unlock them. And sometimes the most powerful thing another person can do is not ask you to become more open. It is simply creating a space where openness happens naturally. That is when you notice the change. You begin speaking differently, thinking differently, showing things you normally keep hidden, not because you plan to, not because you decided, today I will trust this person. It just happens. The defenses become unnecessary, the filtering becomes exhausting. And slowly, without realizing it, you stop protecting yourself from being seen. That is the moment everything shifts. Because the deepest connection is not always when someone learns everything about you. Sometimes it is when you realize you no longer feel the need to hide anything. There is a moment when understanding becomes something more, not because it becomes stronger, but because it becomes impossible to pretend it isn't there. At first, you can observe it from a distance, you can analyze it, you can explain it away. You can tell yourself, it's just a feeling. It's just timing. It's just coincidence. Because the mind searches for reasons when something doesn't fit the usual patterns. But eventually, you reach a point where the explanations become harder to maintain than the truth itself. And the truth is simple. Something about this person changed the way you experience connection. Not because they became your entire world, not because they replaced anything, but because they revealed a part of yourself that had been quiet for a long time. A part that wanted to be understood without having to constantly translate itself. That is what makes certain connections powerful. They don't add something artificial, they remove something unnecessary. The need to pretend, the need to perform, the need to always have the perfect response. With the right person, you don't feel like you are creating a version of yourself. You feel like you are returning to one, and that can be overwhelming. Because when something feels natural, the mind sometimes becomes suspicious. We are used to earning things through effort. We expect meaningful things to require struggle, so when understanding arrives easily, it can feel unreal. But sometimes ease is not a lack of depth. Sometimes ease is the sign that two people are meeting in a place where both already know how to exist, a place beneath appearances, beneath roles, beneath everything people usually use to define themselves. And once someone reaches that place with you, distance starts to feel different, not impossible, not unhealthy, just different, because you become aware that someone has left an impression, a thought, a perspective, a presence, something that remains even when they are not physically there. That is when you realize the connection was never only about interaction, it was about impact. Some people enter your life and become memories. Others become lessons, but a rare few become mirrors. They show you something about yourself that you couldn't see alone. They reveal your own depth, your own patterns, your own ability to connect, and maybe that is why these connections feel so significant, because they are not only about another person, they are also about the version of yourself that appears around them, the version that feels calmer, the version that feels more honest, the version that doesn't need to fight to be understood. And once you experience that, you cannot completely go back to not knowing it exists. You start recognizing the difference between attention and awareness, between someone wanting to know you and someone actually seeing you, between someone being present and someone truly being there. That realization changes the way you move through relationships. Not because everyone else becomes less important, but because you now understand what genuine connection feels like. And that understanding stays. Because the deepest connections are not always the ones that make the most noise. Sometimes they are the quiet ones, the ones that don't need constant proof, the ones that exist in small moments. A shared silence, a familiar understanding, a feeling of being accepted without having to explain every part of yourself. And maybe that is the final realization. The rarest people are not always the ones who know everything about you. They are the ones who make you feel like you were never too much to understand in the first place. There is a difference between remembering someone and carrying an awareness of them. Remembering happens in moments. You think of a person because something reminds you of them, a place, a song, a conversation. But awareness is different. Awareness means they have become connected to the way you process life, not because they control your thoughts, not because you depend on them, but because something about the way they see things has expanded the way you see things. And that is a powerful shift. Because the people who affect us the most are not always the ones who change our circumstances. Sometimes they are the ones who change our perception. They make you notice things you ignored before. They make you question patterns you never examined. They make you see parts of yourself that were always there but remained hidden. And the strange thing is, they may never realize the impact they have, because real influence is often quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand recognition. It simply becomes part of you. That is why some connections are difficult to explain. From the outside, nothing dramatic may be happening, no grand gestures, no constant conversations, no obvious signs. But internally, something has shifted. A person who once felt separate now feels connected to your understanding of certain things. A conversation you had weeks ago still changes the way you think today. A simple sentence stays with you because it touched something deeper than words. And that is when you realize some people don't enter your life through events. They enter through perspective. They become part of the invisible framework behind your thoughts. But this is also where awareness becomes responsibility. Because when something matters, you have to be honest about what it means. Not every powerful connection is meant to be rushed. Not every deep understanding needs an immediate label. Sometimes the most meaningful things require patience. They require allowing something to exist without forcing it into a shape before it is ready. Because forcing certainty can destroy something that needed space. The challenge is learning how to hold something valuable without trying to control it, to appreciate the connection without losing yourself inside it, to recognize someone's importance while still remaining your own person, because the healthiest connections do not erase individuality, they strengthen it. The right person does not make you disappear. They make you more aware of who you already are, and maybe that is the reason certain people feel unforgettable. Not because they completed a missing piece, but because they reminded you of pieces you had forgotten were there. They didn't create your depth. They recognized it. They didn't give you a voice. They made you feel safe enough to use the one you already had. And once someone has been part of that kind of awakening, you don't simply move on as if nothing happened. You carry the understanding forward. You become more aware, more intentional, more honest about what you allow into your life. Because once you know what it feels like to be genuinely understood, you stop searching for connections that only touch the surface. You begin looking for the ones that meet you where you actually exist.